Hey, in this video, I'm going to turn this scummy piece of floor timber into this beautiful magnetic knife rack. Now this is a great little project to make, and there's a myriad of different ways you can do it. I'm going to go through how I made it, but I'm also going to talk about some other alternative ways you can do it. This is a fantastic gift for Christmas if you like making your friends and family things, especially if you've already given them a bunch of chopping boards. All right, let's get into it. Now, I recently picked up a bunch of these small little bits of Rimu timber, and you might look at them and think, why would you want small little bits of timber like that? Well, the main reason is Rimu is a New Zealand native timber, and you can't readily buy it. So I thought, I'll pick it up and see what I can do with it. And then another friend hit me up and said, hey, can you make me a knife rack? And I was looking at these and thinking, they're pretty much knife rack size. So I'll give that a go. So I'm going to try and make a couple of these knife racks, some out of Rimu, and we're going to make a few out of white oak as well, and we'll see how we go with those. Now there is so many ways to make a magnetic knife rack like this, but in particular I'm going to be using these sort of coin magnets, more on those later, and I'm going to embed them into the wood. And there's a lot of different ways we could embed them into the wood as well. The two main options I've thought of is you could drill a hole from the back right through to almost the surface. You could then put your magnet in there and put some epoxy or some dowel over the back just to keep that magnet in place. I've seen this option done a million times. It looks good, it works well. There's many options you could use to drill the hole. You could use a router, you could use a Forstner bit, whatever you want. Personally, I'm going to go the Forstner bit route, but that leaves us with a little problem. You see, a Forstner bit has a little spike on the top of it. We need to drill almost to the face, leaving approximately 2 millimeters of wood left, because the bigger the distance the magnet is from the face of the knife rack, the less magnetic attraction you're going to get. Now that little pointy bit pretty much means that it's going to go through the face before we've actually got deep enough. Now I've seen another video where they've used two Forstner bits. They've used one to start the hole, and they've taken another and they drilled that point off, and then they've used that to finish the other one. And that worked perfectly. Personally, I only have one Forstner bit and I'm not about to ground the point off it right now. So I've got another option. What I'm going to do is, instead of drilling from the back, I'm going to drill from the front, and I'm going to drill just enough so my magnet will fit flush in with the piece of wood. Then I'm going to get another piece of wood and I'm going to glue it over the top, and then I'm going to plane it down until there's only maybe 2 mil of wood left. Then we're going to put a chamfer around the edge and you'll never see that join line. Alright, that's a lot of talking. Let's start cleaning these bits of wood up and see what we can do. First up, we need to clean up the wood. So it's over to the jointer thicknesser, where I can plane off the old poly finish on one side and then thickness it down until I've removed all the grooves and blemishes. It's always super satisfying doing this to old timber, watching it come alive again before your eyes. Then, with the faces cleaned up, I can take them over to the table saw and cut them all down to a uniform length using a crosscut sled. Finally, I switch my blade to a ripping blade and I rip off the old tongue and grooves from both sides of each piece of wood. And as you can see, after the cleanup, the pieces were looking pretty darn good. Alright, it's all cleaned up. I should be used to it by now, but it always surprises me how you can turn some pretty rubbish looking wood into some pretty beautiful looking wood without much effort. Like I said, there's two ways we can do this. We could just drill a hole almost all the way through, leaving about 2 millimeters of meat, and then glue our magnets in, and then backfill them, and we're done. The other way is to just drill a little bit down, enough to flush the magnets in there, and then glue another piece on top, maybe plane that down a bit until it's only about 2 millimeters of wood left in between the magnet and the face, and then we're done. And that's the way we're going to do it. But obviously, it depends on the tools you have. The way I'm going to do it requires a thicknesser, but if you were to just drill a hole through here, you just need a force nibit or two. Now, I've already made one critical mistake in this project, and that was even before I got to touching any of the wood. And that mistake is these magnets. They're just not thick enough. For reference, they're 1 inch in diameter, or about 25 millimeters, and they're 3 millimeters thick. I don't know what the inches are for that. And their rating is N45, which is a very strong magnet. In fact, if I hold one of these on each side of my finger, it feels like it's crushing my finger. The silver lining, though, is I can put 2 of these together, and they are strong enough. So that doesn't change the design much. We're just going to drill a slightly deeper hole, put 2 of them in there, and that should work fine. All right, let's measure where we're going to put these magnets and start drilling some holes. I'm adding 6 magnet holes to this knife block, so I marked out the positions evenly spaced across the timber and chalked up a 25mm or 1 inch force nibit into my drill press. I start with the first hole, drilling and checking the depth against the magnets until I get the perfect flush fit. Then I set the depth stop on my drill press and drill the remaining 5 holes to the same depth. With the holes drilled, I can put the magnets in place ready for gluing the face on. You need to be super careful with these magnets as they're pretty strong. At one point I had a magnet fly out of its hole and hit the magnets I was holding, smashing one of the magnets. With the magnets in place, it's just a matter of gluing the face on top using some tight bond glue. I ended up using some blue tape to help stop the 2 pieces sliding about as I tried to tighten the clamps, and I used a couple of scrap pieces of wood as cawls to ensure even clamping pressure. So I just had 2 small accidents that I thought I'd share with you, because they weren't to do with blades or knives or the usual thing you would imagine. They're all centered around these magnets. So these are N48 very strong neodymium magnets. And when I pulled one off, and I was trying to pull another one off with that in my hand, and they snapped together and shattered and sliced into my finger, which wasn't very nice. So that was accident number 1. So be really careful with these kind of magnets. The second accident I had was I was stupidly trying to glue the pieces of magnet back together, and I was using some CA glue, and I didn't realize it had dribbled down into my fingers. Then I used some kicker to make it dry quickly, and that got in my fingers. And I don't know if you've ever noticed when you use kicker, but it bubbles, and that's heat, and it burnt my finger where I had the CA glue. So be careful with CA glue and kicker as well. All right, let's keep going. Right, now we're all glued together, and as you can see, the magnetism there is very weak. So we need to plane this down to be thin enough that the magnetism is strong enough to hold that. And in retrospect, I probably should have ripped that top piece thinner, because it's going to take a fair bit of planing to get that down. Let's do that now. There you go, that's pretty good. And we've planed that down to about 3 millimeters on the face there. Now I'm going to tidy up the edges, and we'll put some attachments on the back to actually hang this on the wall. Over at the belt sander, I gave the block a quick sand because I wasn't able to glue the pieces perfectly together. I got a bit of a fright here because I momentarily forgot the wood had magnets in it, and it stuck itself to the bed of the sander. Alright, now we've got it made, we need some way to mount this on the wall. So I bought a bunch of these keyhole mounts, We want to recess those in the back. We need to be careful that we don't drill into where our magnets are going to go. Now, on top of actually recessing the depth of these, we need to recess where the screw will slot in as well. So we're going to drill a couple of holes there too. I carefully marked where the centre of the keyhole mount was meant to go, and I used a punch to make a divot to help align the Forstner bit. Then it was back to the drill press to drill the recess. Right, so that is recessed quite nicely in there. So the next problem we have is the screw actually needs to slot in there and be able to move up. And so we need to drill some holes in there to allow for that screw head to move in. Now, you could just freehand it, but I always like to make a little jig to make sure I get my holes drilled in the right place. And 3D printing these jigs is just so effortless and gets you perfect position every time. So I've got this little jig, clamp that on. Now I can just hand drill it using a bit of blue tape to make sure I don't go too deep. And with those holes drilled, we just need to connect them up. The chisel will just chisel out that middle spot. I really need to get some better chisels. And let's just check to see that our screw fits in there nicely. Goes in, slides up perfectly. Look at that. Right, we can screw that in now. Finally, I used a 45-degree chamfer bit to cut a chamfer around the face of the knife block. I set it up so the chamfer starts at the join between the two bits of wood, which effectively hides the join, leaving people confused as to how you made this magic magnetic wood. Then, after a quick sand, I finished them all with some Rubio Monocoat Pure. Well, that's it for this video. I'm really happy with how these turned out. They're nice and simple, but they're really striking hanging on the wall. I know I didn't show you hanging these on the wall. That's because I don't actually have anywhere to hang these. I specifically made one for a friend. Don't forget to like and subscribe, and I'll see you in the next one.